Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back over 3 millennia to ancient Egypt. Close your eyes for a moment, and picture the relentless sun beating down on the Fertile Crescent, the shimmering heat distorting the horizon over the Nile. You're not just a passive observer tonight. You are there, breathing in the dusty air, feeling the coarse linen of your tunic against your skin. The scent of river mud, drying reeds, and something vaguely like old incense hangs in the air. You're a young man, barely a teenager, standing at the precipice of a demanding, yet profoundly respected career. You're about to become an ancient Egyptian scribe. Forget your ergonomic desk chairs and spell check. Your tools are organic, your workspace often the bare ground, and your job security depends entirely on your ability to not, well, mess up spectacularly. You probably won't survive the initial training. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far these whispers travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your bare feet in the fine sand, the grit warm beneath your soles. The low murmur of the scribe school, a cluster of mud brick buildings near the temple complex, hums with activity. The air is thick with the scent of roasted grain and the faint, acrid tang of papyrus pulp. You are a sesh, a student scribe, and your journey into the meticulous world of ancient Egyptian record-keeping begins not with a flourish of the pen, but with the painstaking preparation of the very surface you'll write upon. Your first lessons are less about beautiful calligraphy and more about the delicate art of material readiness. Imagine trying to write on something that's as brittle as a dried leaf one moment and as soggy as a wet towel the next. That's the challenge. You learn to recognize the subtle signs of properly cured papyrus, the way its fibers align, the slight sheen that indicates the right amount of moisture. You're taught how to unroll a fresh scroll, a process that seems simple until you tear a priceless document in front of a master scribe, earning yourself a sharp rap with a reed stick. Trust me, it focuses the mind. One of your first tasks is not writing but preparing the sheets. You're shown how to gently unroll a section of new papyrus, smoothing out any kinks or bumps with a damp cloth. This isn't a quick wipe, it's a meditative process, your fingers subtly pressing down, coaxing the fibers into submission. You learn the difference between the recto, the side where the fibers run horizontally, and the verso, where they run vertically, understanding that the recto was almost always preferred for main text because the pen glided more easily along the grain. It's a bit like knowing which way the grain of wood runs when you're sanding it, crucial for a smooth finish. You might spend hours just observing the older students and masters, watching their precise movements, absorbing the unspoken knowledge. There's a mainstream historical fact here. The quality of papyrus varied widely depending on its source and preparation, with the finest sheets reserved for religious texts and royal decrees. This premium papyrus, often polished to a high sheen, allowed for more intricate hieroglyphic work. But then there's a quirky tidbit. Some lower-grade papyrus, perhaps repurposed from old scrolls or made from less mature plants, was sometimes used for more mundane tasks, like jotting down shopping lists or even for personal letters that weren't expected to last. Historians still argue whether the consistent high quality found in many surviving administrative documents points to a universally strict quality control, or if we're simply seeing the best of what survived. You often wonder, as you painstakingly smooth a slightly uneven sheet, how many rough drafts or quick notes simply crumbled to dust centuries ago. It's a sobering thought, knowing that what you prepare might be the only record of something important. Your hands, once clumsy and tentative, begin to develop a gentle precision. You learn to differentiate the subtle textures of papyrus, almost by touch alone, a skill that will serve you throughout your career. But a surface, no matter how perfectly prepared, is useless without the means to mark it. This brings you to the core of your existence as a scribe, the ink and the reed pen. The master scribe, a stern but patient man with eyes crinkling at the corners from years of squinting at tiny hieroglyphs, demonstrates the preparation of the ink. It's not just a bottle you uncork, it's a small, intricate chemistry experiment. For black ink, the most common type, you watch as he grinds soot, collected painstakingly from lamps or cooking fires, into a fine powder on a stone palette. This isn't just any soot, it's often from specific types of wood or even incense, believed to give the ink a particular quality or permanence. He mixes this powder with a binding agent, usually a gum arabic sourced from acacia trees, which you later learn to identify by its distinctive scent and sticky texture. A little water is added, drop by careful drop, until the mixture achieves the perfect consistency. Not too thick to clog the pen, not too thin to bleed. It's a bit like making a perfect espresso shot, too much water and it's weak, too little and it's sludge. Then there's the red ink, reserved for headings, corrections and significant passages. This is derived from red ochre, a naturally occurring clay rich in iron oxide. You learn to crush the ochre into a fine pigment, much like the soot, and then mix it with gum arabic and water. The vibrant red against the creamy tan of the papyrus is striking, a visual hierarchy that guides the reader's eye. A mainstream historical fact is that Egyptian scribes utilized these two basic colors, black and red, almost exclusively for all their written works for millennia, a testament to their practicality and visual effectiveness. The pens themselves are equally fundamental. You're taught to select a reed, specifically from the Juncus maritimus plant, which grows abundantly along the Nile's banks. You learn to test its flexibility, its straightness, its potential for holding an edge. Then comes the meticulous work of fashioning the pen. With a small, sharp knife, you trim one end of the reed to a point, then chew or fray the very tip to create a brush-like end. This frayed tip, a quirky tidbit, allows for the delicate control needed for hieroglyphs and the broader strokes required for hieratic script. Imagine trying to write your name with a chewed-up twig. That's essentially what you're perfecting. Historians still argue whether the exact technique for shaping these reed pens varied significantly across different scribal schools or over time, given the subtle differences in stroke width and consistency observed in surviving texts. You spend hours, your tongue poking out in concentration trying to get the perfect frayed tip, often discarding reeds that split or fray incorrectly. Each discarded reed is a tiny failure, but each success brings you closer to mastery. The rhythmic scraping of your knife against the reed becomes a familiar sound, almost a meditation. You learn that the pen isn't just a tool, it's an extension of your hand, your thought, your very being as a scribe. It holds the ink, it delivers the symbols, it brings the abstract into tangible existence. With your ink prepared and your reed perfectly frayed, you now face the true heart of Egyptian writing, the scripts themselves. You've seen them etched into temple walls, painted in vibrant hues in tombs, and meticulously penned on the very papyrus you're learning to handle. But what looks like a beautiful, unchanging art form to an outsider is, to you, a living, evolving system. Your initial lessons focus on hieroglyphs, the sacred carvings that are the most recognizable form of ancient Egyptian writing. You spend endless hours drawing, redrawing, and memorizing hundreds of distinct signs. Each one is a tiny picture, a bird, a basket, a leg, a wavy line representing water. It's almost like learning to draw a secret language, where every symbol tells a story not just by its meaning, but by its very form. You learn that hieroglyphs can represent sounds, phonograms, whole words, logograms, or simply act as determinatives, clarifying the meaning of a preceding word. It's a complex dance of image and sound, and your hand aches from the sheer repetition. A mainstream historical fact is that hieroglyphs were primarily used for formal inscriptions on monuments, tomb walls, and for religious texts, meant to last for eternity. Imagine trying to chisel tiny, intricate images into stone all day, your forearms would be huge. But then, as you advance, you're introduced to hieratic. This is where the real speed and efficiency of scribal work comes in. Hieratic is a cursive, simplified version of hieroglyphs, designed for rapid writing on papyrus and ostraca, pottery shards or limestone flakes used for notes and drafts. Suddenly, the intricate bird hieroglyph becomes a few quick strokes, almost like a chicken scratch to the uninitiated. The basket transforms into a shorthand scribble. It's like comparing elaborate Gothic script to your everyday scrawl, both convey meaning but one is clearly faster. A quirky tidbit, because hieratic was written quickly, scribes often developed their own individual quirks and shorthand variations within the established forms, almost like unique handwriting styles that can sometimes make deciphering a particular scribe's work a real challenge even for modern Egyptologists. You practice endlessly, moving from the deliberate precision of hieroglyphs to the fluid rhythm of hieratic. Your goal is not just to copy, but to understand the underlying structure, to feel the flow of the script as it emerges from your reed. You learn to write right to left, the standard direction for most Egyptian texts, though you're also aware that hieroglyphs could be written left to right, top to bottom, or even in columns. It's enough to make your brain do a cartwheel. The orientation of the figures, like animals or people, within the hieroglyphic text often indicates the direction of reading. They almost always face the beginning of the text. Historians still argue whether the transition from hieroglyphs to hieratic was a gradual, organic evolution driven purely by practical efficiency, or if there were specific moments or reforms initiated by powerful scribal schools or pharaohs to standardize the more functional script. You just know that hieratic is what you'll be using for most of your daily work, from administrative accounts to literary compositions, from legal documents to letters. Your ability to quickly and accurately render hieratic is what will mark you as a competent scribe, not just a gifted artist of sacred symbols. The transition feels like shedding a heavy, ceremonial robe for something lighter, more practical, and infinitely more useful for the everyday demands of your calling. You've mastered the art of drawing hieroglyphs and the quick flow of hieratic. You understand the black and red inks, and you can fashion a pen that feels like an extension of your own hand. But none of this matters without the very canvas upon which your knowledge is etched, papyrus. You've handled it, smoothed it, but now you'll truly understand its life cycle, from a reedy plant in the marshes to the smooth sheet beneath your hand. Imagine the banks of the Nile, teeming with life. Among the reeds and rushes, the papyrus plant stands tall and majestic, sometimes reaching heights of 15 feet or more. It's not just a plant, it's the very backbone of Egyptian literacy, a symbol of Lower Egypt and an economic powerhouse. A mainstream historical fact: the ancient Egyptians held a near monopoly on papyrus production for centuries, making it a valuable export commodity across the Mediterranean world. You learn that the best papyrus for writing comes from the triangular pith inside the papyrus stalk. This isn't a job for the faint of heart, or for someone who minds getting muddy. You picture the harvesters wading into the swampy waters, expertly cutting the mature stalks. They strip away the green outer rind, revealing the pale, moist, fibrous core. This pith is then cut into long, thin strips. This is where the magic and the incredible labor begins. Back at the workshop, perhaps a sun-drenched courtyard, you observe the next crucial steps. The strips of pith are laid out, side by side, on a flat surface. You watch as a craftsman meticulously arranges them, slightly overlapping each other, forming a single layer. Then, a second layer of strips is laid directly on top of the first, but this time running perpendicular. It's like weaving but with plant fibers instead of thread. This cross-hatching, a quirky tidbit, is essential for the strength and flexibility of the finished sheet. The plant's natural sap acts as the adhesive, binding the layers together under pressure. No external glues were needed, just the remarkable properties of the papyrus itself. Once the layers are arranged, the combined sheet is placed under immense pressure. Sometimes this is achieved by placing heavy stones on top, or by using a simple press. This pressure, combined with the drying process, forces the sap out and fuses the strips into a single cohesive sheet. After several days of pressing, the sheets are carefully removed. They are still somewhat rough, and that's where your skills come in. You learn to rub the surfaces with a smooth stone, or sometimes a piece of ivory or shell, to flatten the fibers and create a perfectly smooth, receptive surface for writing. This polishing also helps to prevent the ink from bleeding. Historians still argue whether the exact method of drying and pressing varied significantly in different workshops, or if there was a universally adopted, highly standardized process for papyrus manufacture. You just know that a perfectly prepared sheet feels almost alive under your fingers, smooth and slightly resilient, ready to receive the words that will preserve knowledge, prayers, or decrees for generations. You've come to appreciate that the journey of a single papyrus sheet, from a towering plant in the marsh to a finished writing surface, is a testament to Egyptian ingenuity and patience. You've seen the papyrus plant harvested, processed, and smoothed into individual sheets. You can almost feel the faint, reedy scent still clinging to them. But for anything more than a short note or a simple drawing, a single sheet simply isn't enough. This is where the true scroll begins to take shape, through the meticulous process of scroll assembly. Imagine dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of these perfect creamy tan sheets lying before you. They vary slightly in size, but they are all of the finest quality, destined for important records or sacred texts. Your task, or that of a more experienced scribe, is to join these individual pieces into one continuous, flexible roll. This isn't just about sticking them together, it's about creating a durable, functional, and aesthetically pleasing whole. The method is surprisingly simple yet incredibly effective. You take two adjacent sheets and carefully overlap their edges by about 1 to 2 centimeters. Then, using a thin strip of glue made from a mixture of water, flour, and sometimes a little vinegar, you meticulously bond the two surfaces together. This isn't a sloppy job. Too much glue makes the joint stiff and brittle, too little and it won't hold. You learn to apply just the right amount, smoothing it down with your fingers or a small, flat bone tool. The goal is a seamless transition, where the joint is barely perceptible to the touch. A mainstream historical fact is that these individual sheets, once joined, could create scrolls of astonishing length. Some administrative scrolls, like the Great Harris Papyrus, stretched over 40 meters. Imagine the sheer dedication required to prepare and join that much papyrus. Once the glue has dried, and you learn patience waiting for glue to dry in the Egyptian heat, the seams are often lightly hammered or pressed to ensure maximum adhesion and to further flatten the surface. This creates a remarkably strong and flexible joint. You're also taught about reinforcement. For particularly long or important scrolls, or those that might see frequent handling, the beginning and end sections might be reinforced with an extra layer of papyrus, or sometimes even a thin strip of leather or linen, to protect them from wear and tear. It's like adding end papers to a modern book to make it more robust. A quirky tidbit is that the scribes almost always ensured that the horizontal fibers of the recto side, the primary writing surface, ran continuously along the entire length of the scroll. This meant that when unrolled, your reed pen would always glide smoothly along the grain, minimizing resistance and preventing ink from bleeding. The verso side, with its vertical fibers, was rarely used for primary texts, though it might occasionally bear a title or a few brief notes. Historians still argue whether the consistent directionality of the fibers was purely for ease of writing, or if there was a deeper, almost ritualistic significance to presenting text on a perfectly oriented surface. As you work, you appreciate the subtle give of the papyrus as you unroll a new section, the almost imperceptible click as it settles into place. Each joint is a testament to the unseen labor that precedes the act of writing, and a silent promise that the words you are about to lay down will be held together literally for generations. Now that your papyrus sheets are assembled into a robust scroll, and your inks and pens are ready, you turn your attention to the tools that accompany every scribe. This isn't a desk job where everything is laid out for you. You are a mobile professional, often expected to travel with your pharaoh, your general, or your temple administrator. Your scribal kit is your portable office, carefully curated and always at your side. Imagine a small rectangular wooden palette, usually about 30 to 40 centimeters long. This is your most essential tool. It's not just a flat board, it's ingeniously designed. Typically, it has two small circular depressions at one end. One of these holds a cake of black ink, the other a cake of red. You would moisten your reed pen and rub it on these cakes to pick up the pigment, much like a watercolor artist uses pan paints today. A mainstream historical fact is that these scribal palettes, often made of wood, ivory, or even stone, were ubiquitous in ancient Egypt, found in tombs and depicted in countless artworks, testifying to their fundamental importance. Running along the length of the palette, usually carved into a shallow groove, is a slot for your reed pens. You'd probably carry several, of varying sizes and tips, just as a modern artist carries different brushes. Some pens would be finer for detailed hieroglyphs, others broader for the quick strokes of hieratic. Think of it as your personal arsenal of writing weapons. A quirky tidbit is that some palettes have small holes drilled at one end, through which a string might be threaded, allowing the scribe to hang the palette from their neck or waist, ensuring it was always within easy reach. This hands-free carrying method would have been incredibly practical for scribes on the move, perhaps documenting a military campaign or surveying fields. Beyond the palette, your kit contains other crucial items. A small pot or bag for water is essential, not just for mixing ink but for cleaning your pens. A small, rounded stone or a shell might be kept for burnishing the papyrus after writing, giving it a subtle sheen and further securing the ink. Then there's the equivalent of your eraser, a small, sharp knife, often made of bronze, used for carefully scraping away mistakes on the papyrus. This required immense skill. Too much pressure and you'd tear the precious sheet. Too little and the offending word would remain. You also might carry a small pestle and mortar for grinding fresh pigments if your ink cakes ran low. Historians still argue whether the contents of a scribe's kit were largely standardized across different regions and time periods, or if individual scribes had significant leeway in customizing their personal tools based on their specific duties or preferences. You know that your kit is a reflection of your identity and your profession. It's light enough to be portable, yet comprehensive enough to allow you to perform your duties anywhere, from the dusty fields where you might tally harvest to the hushed sanctity of a temple where you might copy sacred texts. This collection of tools, simple yet perfectly adapted, is your livelihood, your prestige, and your connection to the millennia of knowledge that flows through the strokes of your reed pen. With your scroll assembled and your scribal kit neatly packed, you're ready to actually apply ink to papyrus. But it's not just about writing words, it's about organizing them within the vast expanse of a scroll. The most common and enduring method you'll encounter is the horizontal layout, structured into distinct columns. Imagine unrolling a section of a new scroll. You'll notice immediately that the text isn't just sprawled across the sheet like a modern letter. Instead, it's meticulously arranged in columns, flowing from right to left across the horizontally oriented fibers of the papyrus. Each column is a self-contained block of text, usually of uniform width, creating a visually appealing and highly readable page. A mainstream historical fact is that this columnar layout was the standard for almost all literary, religious, and administrative texts on papyrus in ancient Egypt, a system that proved incredibly efficient for thousands of years. You learn the precise art of ruling lines, not with a modern ruler, but with a straightedge and a thin red or black line, often drawn with a lighter hand or even a dry point, a pointed tool that indents the papyrus without ink. These lines serve as guides for the top and bottom of your hieratic script, ensuring a consistent height for your characters and a neat appearance. You'd also rule faint vertical lines to mark the boundaries of each column. The columns themselves weren't always fixed in number. A scribe might adjust the width of the columns based on the length of the text, the size of the papyrus, or the desired aesthetic effect. A wider column might be used for a legal document, while a narrower one might be preferred for a literary work. The process involves unrolling a section of the scroll, writing out one column, then the next, proceeding from right to left. As you complete a section, you carefully roll up the written part and unroll fresh papyrus from the left, continuing your work. It's a rhythmic motion, a constant unrolling and re-rolling that becomes second nature. You're constantly managing the physical scroll as much as you are managing the text. A quirky tidbit is that scribes sometimes used a small, circular boss or knob attached to the end of the scroll, often made of wood, ivory, or even bone. This boss would help with handling and rolling the scroll, especially longer ones, providing a more comfortable grip and preventing the papyrus from being damaged by constant finger contact. Think of it as a built-in handle for your ancient document. Historians still argue whether the consistent column width seen in many literary papyri was due to strict scribal education, or if it was more a practical outcome of optimizing the amount of text visible to a reader at any given moment, making it easier to follow the narrative without excessive unrolling. You just know that a perfectly formatted column with consistent line height and neat margins is a source of pride, a testament to your training and your dedication. It's about creating order from what could easily become a chaotic jumble of symbols. While the horizontal, columnar layout is your bread and butter as a scribe, you quickly learn that the ancient Egyptians were not entirely rigid in their textual organization. There are fascinating anomalies and variations, moments where the typical flow of script shifts, often for very specific reasons. These departures from the norm are like little historical footnotes, hinting at a scribe's purpose or a document's unique function. Imagine encountering a scroll where suddenly the text doesn't flow right to left in horizontal lines within columns, but instead runs vertically, top to bottom. This is a rare but significant deviation. A mainstream historical fact is that vertical writing was most commonly employed for inscriptions on narrow surfaces, such as door jambs, steely, upright stone slabs, or sometimes on coffins, where the physical space dictated the orientation of the text. This practical constraint, rather than a stylistic choice for papyrus, was the primary driver. However, you might occasionally see vertical columns on papyrus, often in religious or magical texts, where the layout might be mimicking the monumental inscriptions, perhaps to lend the scroll a more sacred or powerful aura. It's like switching from a neatly typed letter to a fancy calligraphic scroll. Same words, different presentation for different effect. Another quirky tidbit involves palindromic texts or spells. While not strictly a vertical script, some magical texts were intentionally written in a way that the words could be read in multiple directions, sometimes even backwards or in a spiral, believed to amplify their power. These were not for easy reading but for ritualistic use. Imagine the headache of trying to decipher a spell that's meant to be read in 3 different ways. It's enough to make you want to throw your reed pen at the wall. You also encounter texts where certain sections are written much larger or smaller than the main body, or where spacing between lines or words changes dramatically. This isn't usually a mistake but a deliberate choice. Large script might indicate a heading or a particularly important divine utterance, drawing the reader's eye immediately. Smaller script might be used for glosses, explanatory notes, marginalia, or perhaps for less important details in an administrative record, allowing more information to be squeezed onto a single, precious sheet of papyrus. Historians still argue whether these variations in script orientation or size on papyrus were purely pragmatic adaptations to the available space or the nature of the content, or if they sometimes carried symbolic or ritualistic meanings, especially in religious contexts. You, as a scribe, learn to interpret these shifts not as errors, but as deliberate visual cues from the original author or previous copyist. You understand that your job isn't just to transcribe, but to faithfully reproduce these nuances, ensuring that the visual impact and intended emphasis of the original document are preserved. It's a subtle art, recognizing when to adhere strictly to the columnar norm and when to embrace the fascinating, if challenging, world of scribal variation. You've learned the layout, the direction, and even the rare exceptions. Now, let's talk about how a scribe made certain parts of a scroll jump out at you, how they created visual emphasis and hierarchy on a page. This is where rubrication comes in, the strategic use of red ink, which you meticulously prepared from ochre. Imagine a long, unbroken sequence of black hieratic text. While readable, it can be a bit of a wall of words. The ancient Egyptians, with their keen eye for design and function, understood the power of color to guide the reader. A mainstream historical fact is that red ink was almost universally employed in ancient Egyptian texts for highlighting specific elements, a practice so consistent it becomes a defining characteristic of their scribal tradition. So, what warranted this special treatment? The most common use of red ink was for headings and titles. As you unroll a new section of a religious text or a medical treatise, you might see the opening line of a new chapter or a specific section suddenly appear in vivid red. This immediately signals a shift in content, a new idea, or a new topic. It's like seeing a bolded heading in a modern textbook. Your eyes go straight to it. Beyond headings, red ink also marked initial words of sentences or clauses in some texts, especially in literary works or spells, adding a rhythmic punctuation to the reading experience. Think of it as a subtle way to ease the reader into the flow of the narrative. But perhaps the most interesting use of red ink was for corrections or comments. If a scribe made an error, instead of scraping it out entirely, though that happened too, they might simply draw a red line through the incorrect word and write the correct one in black above it. Or if a master scribe was reviewing your work, they might add a marginal note in red, offering a critique or clarification. This practice gives us a fascinating glimpse into the editorial processes of the ancient world. A quirky tidbit. In some medical papyri, specific instructions for the patient or warnings about dangerous symptoms might be written in red, almost like a caution or danger sign. Imagine a doctor's prescription where the really important bits were highlighted in bright red. Pretty effective, right? Another fascinating application is in funerary texts, particularly the Book of the Dead. Here, the instructions for the deceased or the names of dangerous demons they might encounter were often written in red, perhaps to signify their importance or their potentially perilous nature. Historians still argue whether the choice to use red ink for specific elements was based on universally agreed upon scribal conventions passed down through generations, or if individual scribes or schools had some discretion in their rubrication practices, leading to subtle variations in how different types of texts were emphasized. You, as a scribe, learn that the careful placement of red ink is not just aesthetic, it's functional. It directs the eye, conveys importance, and sometimes even warns. It's a silent conversation between the scribe and the reader, spanning millennia. Even the most skilled scribe, with the finest papyrus and the perfectly prepared ink, is human. And humans, bless our fallible brains and clumsy fingers, make mistakes. In ancient Egypt, where information was painstakingly recorded and papyrus was precious, corrections and erasures were a fundamental part of a scribe's daily routine. This wasn't about hitting delete or reaching for a bottle of whiteout. It was a delicate, often slow process. Imagine you've just spent an hour meticulously copying a complex religious text, your hand cramping, your eyes strained. Suddenly you realize you've skipped a line or worse, written the wrong deity's name. Panic. Your first instinct might be to groan, but you quickly remember your training. A mainstream historical fact is that scribes typically corrected errors directly on the papyrus, rather than discarding the entire sheet or scroll, a testament to the value of the material and the effort already invested. The most common method for correcting a minor error was to simply scrape it away. You'd use a small, sharp knife, often the same one you use to shape your reed pens, or sometimes a specially designed scraper. With immense care and a steady hand, you'd gently shave off the top layer of papyrus where the ink had been absorbed. This is an incredibly delicate procedure. Too much pressure, and you'd tear a hole in the scroll. Too little, and the ink would remain visible, a ghostly shadow beneath your correction. Once the offending marks were removed, you could then carefully rewrite the correct characters or words over the scraped area. This left a slightly thinner, sometimes rougher, patch on the papyrus, a subtle scar that whispers of a scribe's brief moment of imperfection. For more significant errors, or if scraping was too risky, a scribe might overwrite the incorrect text directly, or simply draw a line through it in red ink and then write the correction in the margin or above the line. This was a less invasive method, preserving the original, albeit incorrect, text and providing a clear visual record of the correction. Think of it as leaving a paper trail, or rather a papyrus trail, of your mistakes. A quirky tidbit is that some scribes, particularly in less formal documents or during initial drafting, might simply use a damp cloth to lightly blot away fresh ink before it dried completely, allowing for a quick, invisible correction. This required incredible speed and a keen eye for when the ink was still malleable. Historians still argue whether the frequency and visibility of corrections in surviving papyri can tell us something about the pressure scribes were under, the difficulty of the text they were copying, or even their individual skill levels. You, personally, prefer the invisible correction because nothing beats the satisfaction of a perfectly flawless page, even if you know the ghost of a misstep once lurked beneath your elegant script. The art of correction is almost as important as the art of writing itself, a testament to resilience and meticulousness in the face of human error. You've brought the text to life, corrected its minor flaws and ensured its proper layout. But a scroll isn't truly complete without its signature, its timestamp, its final whisper from the scribe to eternity. This is the role of colophons and dating, the often overlooked but incredibly valuable closing notes that reveal so much about the ancient world. Imagine finishing a long, complex text. Your hand is weary, but there's a sense of profound accomplishment. Before you roll up the scroll for good, you perform one last, crucial act. You add the colophon. A mainstream historical fact is that colophons, found at the very end of many papyrus scrolls, served as a scribe's concluding statement, often providing details about the completion of the work. What kind of details? Often, the colophon would state the date of completion. This wasn't just the day but often the specific regnal year of the reigning pharaoh, or sometimes a specific festival or event. For example, you might write, Year 3, 2nd month of Parate, Day 10, under the majesty of King Pharaoh's name, may he live forever. This meticulous dating is a goldmine for modern historians, allowing them to precisely place texts within a chronological framework. Without these dates, much of our understanding of Egyptian history would be a chaotic jumble. Beyond the date, the scribe would often include their own name. This was their personal signature, their claim to the work. It's like a modern artist signing their painting, a subtle assertion of authorship and skill. Sometimes, the scribe might even include their father's name or their title, linking them to a specific family or professional lineage. Written by the scribe Nesemen, son of the priest Amenhotep. A quirky tidbit is that scribes sometimes added personal reflections or even pleas for good fortune in their colophons. You might find a scribe lamenting the difficulty of the text, thanking the gods for its completion, or even asking a future reader to pray for them. One famous colophon reads, "He who copies will flourish, but he who steals will perish." Talk about a passive-aggressive threat, right? It's these small human touches that remind you these ancient scribes were individuals, not just anonymous copyists. Historians still argue whether the presence or absence of a colophon, or the amount of detail within it, reflects the importance of the text, the status of the scribe, or simply the prevailing scribal conventions of a particular era. You know that adding your colophon is the final flourish, the last stroke of your reed pen before the words are rolled away into storage. It's your whisper across the millennia, a quiet declaration that you were here, you did this work and you contributed to the vast flowing river of Egyptian knowledge. With the colophon inked and the final flourish made, your masterpiece is complete. But the work of preserving knowledge doesn't end there. A scroll, no matter how carefully crafted, is vulnerable to the ravages of time, pests, and careless handling. Therefore, the way you approach scroll storage is paramount to its survival. Imagine your finished scroll, perhaps a meter long, carefully rolled from left to right, so that the beginning of the text is on the inside and the end, with your colophon, is on the outside. This common practice, a mainstream historical fact, protected the fragile beginning of the text, which would be most exposed to wear and tear when unrolled. The outside of the scroll often had a brief title or identifying label written on its verso, the side with vertical fibers, usually left blank, or sometimes a small tag attached so it could be easily identified without having to unroll it completely. This was the ancient world's equivalent of a spine label on a book. To further protect these precious documents, scribes and librarians employed several methods. Many scrolls were placed inside cylindrical jars, often made of pottery, or sometimes wooden or leather cases. These containers provided a crucial barrier against dust, moisture, and most importantly pests like insects and rodents who found papyrus a rather tasty snack. You might imagine the dread of unrolling a scroll only to find half of it chewed away by hungry beetles, a scribe's nightmare. These jars or cases would then be sealed, sometimes with clay and a stamp, further protecting the contents. A quirky tidbit: some very important or sacred scrolls, particularly those kept in temples, might have been wrapped in linen cloths before being placed in their containers. This extra layer of protection not only cushioned the papyrus but also added a symbolic element of purity and reverence. Think of it like wrapping a treasured relic in silk before putting it away. You'd learn to roll the scroll firmly but not too tightly, ensuring it maintained its structural integrity without creasing or cracking the papyrus. The goal was to keep the roll as compact as possible without causing damage, a delicate balance. Historians still argue whether the consistency in scroll dimensions across various types of texts indicates a standardization of storage containers, or if the containers were custom-made to fit scrolls of varying lengths and diameters. You understand that a well-stored scroll is a silent promise to future generations, a testament to the foresight and diligence of those who came before you. It's more than just putting something away, it's an act of preserving history, knowledge, and the very essence of your civilization. You've seen the individual scroll protected, but what about vast collections of them? As a scribe, you might find yourself working in or contributing to larger repositories of knowledge. This leads us to the fascinating realm of library organization, particularly within the hallowed confines of temples and tombs. These weren't public lending libraries as you know them. They were specialized archives, repositories of sacred knowledge, administrative records, and literary masterpieces. Imagine stepping into a section of a vast temple complex. Here, within dedicated rooms or even specialized buildings, were the temple libraries, often referred to as the houses of life. These institutions were not just places for storing scrolls. They were centers of learning where scribes studied, copied, and translated texts. A mainstream historical fact is that these temple libraries housed an incredible diversity of scrolls, from religious rituals and astronomical observations to medical treatises and historical chronicles. They were the intellectual hubs of ancient Egypt. The organization within these libraries wasn't based on Dewey Decimal. It was a system of practical classification. Scrolls were typically categorized by subject matter. You might find one alcove dedicated to medical texts, another to hymns, and yet another to legal documents. Scrolls of the same type might be stored together in wooden chests, niches carved into walls, or in large pottery jars. The identifying labels on the outside of the rolled scrolls, or on tags attached to them, were crucial for quickly locating specific texts. Imagine trying to find one specific scroll among hundreds without any labels. It would be a chaotic treasure hunt. Tomb libraries, though often smaller, served a different yet equally vital purpose. These were collections of texts, primarily religious and magical spells, meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The most famous example is the collection of spells known collectively as the Book of the Dead, which provided guidance and protection for the soul's journey. A quirky tidbit: these tomb libraries weren't always neatly organized on shelves. Scrolls might be placed directly into sarcophagi, between bandages of mummies, or within specially designed compartments in the tomb chamber, often as personal copies for the tomb owner. The idea was to ensure the deceased had access to these vital texts in the afterlife. Historians still argue whether there was a standardized cataloging system across different temple libraries throughout Egypt, or if each institution developed its own unique methods for organizing its vast collections. You understand that the efficient organization of these scrolls, whether for the living or for the journey to the afterlife, was a testament to the meticulous nature of Egyptian bureaucracy and their profound respect for the written word. It was an unspoken promise that knowledge, once recorded, should not be lost to the shifting sands of time. Despite the meticulous care and preparation, organization, and storage, the vast majority of ancient Egyptian papyrus scrolls have been lost to the ages. You, as a scribe, are acutely aware that your work, no matter how vital, is inherently fragile. The enduring dry climate of Egypt has been a remarkable preserver, but even it cannot win every battle against the forces of decay and destruction. Imagine the sheer volume of writing produced over 3 millennia. Every administrative decree, every legal contract, every personal letter, every literary tale, every magical incantation, every medical prescription, all meticulously penned on papyrus. A mainstream historical fact is that the number of papyri that have survived to this day represents only a minuscule fraction of what was originally created. This makes every surviving fragment a treasure, a rare glimpse into a world otherwise lost. So why such immense loss? The primary culprit is environment. While the arid conditions of Upper Egypt are excellent for preservation, the fertile, humid Nile Delta region, where much of the population lived and worked, was a far less forgiving environment for organic materials like papyrus. Moisture, fungi, and insects quickly consume papyrus, reducing it to dust. Imagine trying to store paper in a damp basement for thousands of years. It simply wouldn't last. Most of the papyri we have today come from dry desert sands, tombs, or deliberately buried caches. Beyond natural decay, there's the issue of deliberate destruction and recycling. Papyrus was valuable. Old, irrelevant documents might be washed clean and reused, or simply discarded in trash heaps where they would quickly decompose. Temples might be destroyed or repurposed, their libraries scattered or burned. Even the act of rolling and unrolling a scroll for generations causes wear and tear, eventually leading to its disintegration. A quirky tidbit is that archaeologists have occasionally found papyrus fragments reused as cartonnage, a material made from layers of stiffened linen or papyrus, often plastered and painted, used for mummy masks and coffins. This repurposing, while destroying the original text, inadvertently preserved small pieces of what would otherwise be utterly lost. It's like finding a priceless historical document used as packing peanuts for something else entirely. Historians still argue whether the apparent gaps in our knowledge of certain periods of Egyptian history are solely due to the accidents of preservation, or if there were also periods where less was written down, or where certain types of records were simply not deemed important enough to be preserved for posterity. You understand that the words you meticulously lay down today are a fleeting breath against the winds of time, a tiny spark that just might, endure for millennia if the conditions are precisely right. The realization makes every stroke of your reed pen feel profoundly significant. You've followed the journey of the ancient Egyptian scribe from the raw papyrus plant to the meticulously organized scroll, through the painstaking acts of writing, correcting, and preserving. Now, as the soft light of evening begins to fade, let's consider the enduring legacy of these scribal practices and how their influence rippled through history, shaping the very way we interact with written information today. The methods perfected by ancient Egyptian scribes didn't simply vanish with the decline of their civilization. They laid fundamental groundwork for subsequent writing traditions. A mainstream historical fact is that the column format, the use of two distinct colors for emphasis, and the practice of adding colophons at the end of texts were all elements adopted, in various forms by later cultures, including the Greeks and Romans, who also used papyrus and parchment scrolls. When you open a modern book and see a clear title page, distinct chapters, and perhaps even a bibliography at the end, you're witnessing echoes of scribal decisions made thousands of years ago along the Nile. Consider the very idea of a book. While the codex, the bound book with pages you flip, eventually replaced the scroll itself was the dominant format for millennia. The way a scribe had to unroll and re-roll, managing a continuous text, influenced how narratives were structured and how information was accessed. A quirky tidbit: the Roman volumen, their term for a scroll, directly derives from the Latin verb volvere, meaning to roll, a clear nod to its Egyptian ancestor. Even today the word volume for a book harks back to those ancient rolls. Imagine trying to quickly reference a specific passage in a 50-meter scroll. It made for a rather different reading experience than a quick flick of a modern page. The scribe's toolkit, the palette, the pens, the water pot, is a testament to the efficient and practical design. These basic tools, in various iterations, remained in use for centuries across different cultures, demonstrating their timeless effectiveness. The act of writing itself, the meticulous control over ink and instrument, instilled a discipline that became the hallmark of literacy and administration. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian scribal tradition, with its emphasis on copying and preserving canonical texts, inadvertently hindered innovation in writing systems, or if its very stability provided the bedrock for subsequent developments like the alphabet. You can reflect on the quiet dedication of those countless anonymous scribes, their fingers stained with black and red ink, their eyes accustomed to the glare of the desert sun on papyrus. They were the custodians of knowledge, the silent architects of history. Their meticulous organization of papyrus scrolls was not just a technical process. It was an act of faith in the enduring power of the written word, a belief that ideas, once recorded, could transcend time and mortality. And in a way they did. Because even now, as you drift off to sleep, you are still experiencing the quiet resonance of their ancient, organized whispers. Word count, 1060. As your own eyelids grow heavy, and the day's concerns begin to soften, allow your mind to gently release the sun-baked landscapes and the dusty scribal chambers. The whispers of ancient Egypt are fading now, dissolving back into the quiet hum of the night. There's nothing left to do but let your breath deepen, your muscles relax, and the last vestiges of our journey melt away. The meticulous organization of scrolls, the patient hands of the scribes, it all recedes, leaving only the tranquil silence of your own peaceful space. Rest deeply, and may your dreams be as orderly and well-preserved as the finest ancient papyrus.